Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead as he adjusted the final support beam on his shelter. The red sand of Zirian 7 clung to everything, making even simple tasks feel like battles against the planet itself. Around him, the other colonists had long since finished their own structures, gleaming towers of crystalline technology that hummed with energy shields and climate control systems. Still working on that thing? Zexai clicked his mandibles in what Marcus had learned was the Cathurian equivalent of laughter. The insectoid alien's compound eyes reflected the harsh sunlight as he gestured toward Marcus's shelter with one of his forearms. Human, your species truly is as primitive as the galactic databases suggest. Marcus didn't look up from his work. He'd heard variations of this comment every day for the past 3 weeks since arriving on the frontier mining colony. The other species had all brought their advanced technology, their force fields, their automated construction systems. Marcus had brought blueprints, basic tools, and what the others considered an embarrassingly simple approach to survival. It serves its purpose, Marcus replied, checking the tension on a support cable. His shelter looked nothing like the elegant spires around him. Built low to the ground, it resembled an ancient earth bunker more than anything else. Thick walls made from local sand mixed with a polymer resin he'd synthesized from desert plants. No energy shields, no climate control systems, no gleaming surfaces that proclaimed technological superiority. Velter, one of the Aquarian representatives, flowed closer on her tentacle-like appendages. Her translucent blue skin rippled with what Marcus recognized as amusement. Chen human, perhaps you require assistance. Our construction matrices could erect a proper habitation unit for you in mere hours, something with actual defensive capabilities. The other aliens gathered around, drawn by the spectacle of the humans' continued manual labor. There were Cathurians with their metallic exoskeletons, Aquarians with their fluid grace, and the towering stone-like Gorlak whose very presence made the ground vibrate. All of them had completed their shelters weeks ago using technology that Marcus could barely comprehend, let alone afford. I appreciate the offer, Marcus said, finally straightening up to face the assembled crowd. But I prefer to understand exactly how my shelter works and what might cause it to fail. Zexai's mandibles clicked again. Fail? Our structures are powered by quantum matrix generators. They do not fail. Everything fails eventually, Marcus replied quietly. The question is what you do when it happens. Gorlak Prime, the Gorlak expedition leader, spoke in a voice like grinding mountains. The human's pessimism is as primitive as his construction methods. Our energy barriers have protected colonies for thousands of years. Zirian 7 weather patterns are well documented. Sand, heat, occasional dust devils, nothing that requires such rudimentary precautions. Marcus looked up at the darkening sky on the horizon. The colony's weather monitoring systems had been tracking a disturbance for days, but the predictions remained inconsistent. Some readings suggested a minor dust storm, others indicated something larger. The alien colonists had dismissed the warnings entirely, trusting in their advanced technology and the planet's supposedly predictable climate patterns. What about the atmospheric pressure readings? Marcus asked. The ones from the deep desert monitoring station. Velter's skin shifted to a dismissive purple. Anomalous data, equipment malfunction. The atmospheric processors will handle any minor fluctuations. The wind speed measurements from Sector 7. Within normal parameters, Zexai responded without hesitation. Your species' tendency toward excessive caution is well documented, Chen human. Perhaps it served you well on your primitive homeworld, but here we have actual science to guide our decisions. Marcus nodded slowly, not wanting to argue further. He'd learned that contradicting the others often led to long lectures about human inadequacy and the superiority of galactic civilization. Instead, he returned to his work, making final adjustments to his shelter's ventilation system. The other colonists gradually dispersed, returning to their own activities with the satisfied air of beings who had once again confirmed their superiority over the backward human in their midst. Their structures rose like crystal spears against the alien sky, beautiful and imposing. Energy barriers shimmered around each one, keeping out dust, regulating temperature, and providing protection against any environmental threats the planet might offer. Marcus's shelter, by contrast, looked like a hill. The entrance was barely visible, protected by multiple barriers that could be sealed independently. The walls were thick enough that no equipment readings could penetrate them, but also included carefully designed channels that would allow air to flow while blocking sand and debris. Everything was manual, everything was redundant, and everything could be repaired with basic tools and materials available on the planet. As the sun began to set, Marcus activated his communication device to send his daily report to the mining consortium. The device was a compromise between human and alien technology, capable of quantum transmission, but simple enough for Marcus to understand and repair. Day 23, personal log, he spoke into the device. Colony construction proceeding on schedule, all structures completed and functional. Weather monitoring continues to show conflicting data. Recommend continued observation and preparation for possible severe weather event. He paused, watching the horizon where strange clouds were beginning to form. The alien weather prediction systems showed nothing unusual, but Marcus had grown up in the desert regions of Earth. He recognized the signs that technology sometimes missed. Personal note, he added quietly. Something's coming. The atmospheric pressure has been dropping steadily for 12 hours, but the gradient is wrong. The wind patterns don't match the computer models, and the wildlife has gone silent. It was true. The small creatures that normally emerged at sunset, filling the air with their strange calls and chittering sounds, had not appeared. The desert felt empty, waiting, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Marcus sealed his communication device and made one final circuit around his shelter. He checked every seal, every support, every system that kept the structure functional. Unlike his neighbors, he couldn't simply trust that everything would work as designed. If something went wrong, he would need to understand exactly what had failed and how to fix it with whatever materials he had available. The other colonists were visible through their transparent energy barriers, going about their evening routines without concern. Their structures provided perfect climate control, filtered air, and complete protection from the planet's environment. From their perspective, they had conquered Zirian 7 simply by erecting their technology and trusting it to handle any problems the planet might present. Marcus entered his shelter and sealed the outer door, then the inner door, creating an airlock that could function even if the power systems failed. Inside, the space was smaller than the alien structures, but carefully designed for efficiency and survival. Every surface served multiple purposes, every system had backups, and everything could be operated manually if necessary. As he prepared for sleep, Marcus checked his instruments one more time. The atmospheric pressure had dropped another 5 points, and the wind speed was beginning to increase. The alien weather system still showed normal conditions, but Marcus trusted his own readings more than their predictions. Outside, the wind began to whistle against his shelter's outer walls, a sound that gradually grew louder as the night progressed. Marcus lay in his bed, listening to the planet's voice and wondering if tomorrow would bring the test he'd been preparing for since the day he'd arrived. In the distance, barely audible over the wind, he could hear the hum of alien energy barriers maintaining perfect conditions inside their crystalline towers. The sounds were steady, confident, and completely unaware of what was building in the deep desert beyond the colony's borders. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that if his instincts were correct, tomorrow would prove whether his primitive human methods could succeed where advanced alien technology might fail. The desert had its own rules, and those rules cared nothing for the technological superiority of galactic civilization. The wind continued to rise, carrying with it the first hints of sand and the promise of something far worse than a simple dust storm approaching from the deep desert, where no monitoring station could reach, and no computer model could predict what Zirian 7 was about to unleash upon the unsuspecting colony. Marcus woke to the sound of wind that no longer whistled but roared like a living thing trying to tear the planet apart. The atmospheric pressure readings on his instruments had plummeted overnight, dropping to levels that should have triggered every emergency system in the colony. Through his shelter's small viewing port, he could see that the sky had turned an ominous orange-brown, and visibility had dropped to less than 50 meters. The communication channels buzzed with confusion as the other colonists began to realize that something unprecedented was happening. Their weather prediction systems were failing to provide accurate readings, reporting conflicting data that made no sense according to their models of Zirian 7 climate patterns. Emergency status report, Gorlak Prime's voice rumbled through the comm system, barely audible over the growing wind noise. All structures report status immediately. One by one, the alien colonists responded. Their energy barriers were functioning perfectly, their climate control systems maintaining ideal conditions, their quantum matrix generators operating at full efficiency. Everything was working exactly as designed, creating perfect bubbles of artificial environment while the planet outside grew increasingly hostile. "Chen Human, report status," came Zexai's command, his usual mockery replaced by a tone of growing concern. "All systems nominal," Marcus responded simply. "Shelter is secure and functioning." "Your atmospheric readings?" Velter asked, her voice carrying frequencies that indicated stress among the Aquarian species. Marcus glanced at his instruments. The pressure was still dropping, wind speeds were approaching dangerous levels, and the temperature was fluctuating wildly as the storm systems fought for dominance overhead. Pressure at 47 and falling, wind speed steady at 120 kilometers per hour and climbing, temperature variance of 15 degrees over the past hour. Silence followed his report. The alien weather systems were not registering anything close to those readings, still reporting normal conditions with minor fluctuations. The discrepancy was becoming impossible to ignore. "Impossible," Gorlak Prime declared. "Our sensors show normal atmospheric conditions. Your primitive instruments must be malfunctioning." Marcus checked his readings again. If anything, the conditions were worsening faster than his instruments could track. The storm that was approaching was unlike anything in the colony's database, a phenomenon that the advanced alien weather prediction systems simply could not recognize or categorize. "I recommend everyone double-check their barrier systems and prepare backup power sources," Marcus transmitted. "This storm is going to be significantly worse than predicted." His suggestion was met with the digital equivalent of dismissive laughter from multiple species. Their technology was proven, tested across thousands of worlds and countless environmental challenges. A simple storm on a well-surveyed planet posed no threat to galactic standard protection systems. Marcus sealed his communication device and began his own storm preparations. Unlike the others, he couldn't simply trust his technology to handle whatever Zirian 7 was about to throw at them. Every system in his shelter required active monitoring, manual backup procedures, and constant adjustment to maintain effectiveness. The first sign that the alien's confidence might be misplaced came 2 hours later when Velter's voice crackled through the comm system with barely controlled panic. "Energy fluctuations in barrier matrix 7, attempting to compensate through auxiliary power routing. Quantum resonance detected in matrix generators," Zexai reported moments later, his mandibles clicking with stress patterns Marcus had never heard before. "Systems are experiencing harmonic interference from unknown source." Marcus checked his own readings and grimaced. The electromagnetic interference from the storm was unlike anything the alien systems had been designed to handle. Their advanced technology, so superior to his primitive methods, was encountering a form of natural phenomenon that existed outside their experience and understanding. "All stations, maintain barrier integrity," Gorlak Prime commanded, but his voice carried undertones of uncertainty that made the ground vibrate with his species' equivalent of anxiety. Through his viewing port, Marcus could see the first signs of the true storm approaching. What had seemed like severe weather was merely the outer edge of something far more massive. The wall of sand and debris rising on the horizon stretched from the ground to the upper atmosphere, a moving mountain of destruction that dwarfed anything in the colony's records. "Unknown contact on horizon," he reported quietly. "Recommend immediate emergency protocols." "Define unknown contact," Velter demanded. "Sandstorm, approximately 300 meters high, 5 kilometers wide, approaching from bearing 270. Estimated time to impact, 40 minutes. The communication channels erupted in multiple languages as the alien colonists struggled to understand how their monitoring systems had failed to detect such a massive weather event. Their sensors, designed to track phenomena across vast distances and predict weather patterns with mathematical precision, had somehow missed the largest storm system any of them had ever encountered. Marcus began activating his emergency protocols, sealing additional barriers, switching to backup life support systems, and preparing for complete isolation from the outside environment. His shelter had been designed specifically for this moment. built to survive when everything else failed and all advanced technology proved inadequate against the raw power of an alien world. Barrier fluctuations increasing, HFY reported, his voice now carrying clear distress signals. Matrix coherence dropping below safety parameters, attempting emergency stabilization. Same here, Velter confirmed. The interference patterns are unlike anything in our databases. Our systems don't know how to compensate. The storm wall was now clearly visible to all colonists, a towering mass of sand, debris, and electrical energy that moved with purpose and power that defied their understanding of atmospheric science. The electromagnetic discharges within the storm created patterns that overloaded alien sensors, while the sheer physical force generated pressure waves that disrupted their delicate energy matrices. Marcus watched through his reinforced viewing port as the first alien structure began to show signs of stress. HFY's crystalline tower, so beautiful and impressive just hours before, was flickering as its energy barriers struggled against forces they had never been designed to encounter. The quantum matrix generators that powered galactic civilization were failing in the face of a natural phenomenon that existed beyond their theoretical models. Emergency evacuation protocols? Gorlak Prime asked, his massive voice now carrying clear undertones of fear. Where, Marcus replied simply, the storm covers everything within scanning range. There's nowhere to evacuate to. The aliens fell silent as they realized the implications. Their technology, their scientific understanding, their complete confidence in galactic superiority meant nothing against a planet that operated by rules they had never encountered. They were trapped in structures that were failing, with no backup plans and no understanding of how to survive using primitive methods. Chen Human, Velter transmitted privately, her voice carrying frequencies that indicated desperate hope among her species. Your shelter, how certain are you of its integrity? Marcus looked around his simple, manually operated refuge. Every system was working exactly as designed, every backup was ready, and every component could be repaired or replaced using materials available on Zirian 7. Very certain, he replied. Could it accommodate additional inhabitants? Before Marcus could respond, HFY's panicked voice filled the communication channels. Barrier collapse imminent. Matrix failure across all generators. Emergency, emergency, emergency. Through his viewing port, Marcus watched the beautiful crystalline tower lose its protective energy fields just as the storm wall reached the colony's perimeter. In seconds, the structure that had seemed so advanced and indestructible was being sandblasted by winds carrying debris at speeds that turned sand grains into projectiles capable of cutting through metal. The storm had arrived, and with it came the test that would determine whether human ingenuity and preparation could succeed where alien technology and overconfidence had failed. Marcus reached for his communication device as the roar of wind and sand began to drown out everything else, knowing that the next few hours would change everything about how the galactic community viewed the primitive human methods they had mocked so confidently. Outside, Zirian 7 unleashed its fury upon the colony, and the aliens' perfect technology began to crumble like sand castles before the tide. The storm hit the colony like the wrath of an angry god. Marcus felt his shelter shake as winds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour drove sand and debris against the thick walls he had so carefully constructed. Around him, every manual system continued to function exactly as designed, while the communication channels filled with increasingly desperate calls from his alien neighbors. Life support failing. HFY's voice crackled through massive interference, barely recognizable through the electromagnetic chaos of the storm. Environmental systems offline, emergency power at 15% and dropping. Marcus checked his own systems. Air filtration working perfectly through mechanical filters that required no power. Water recycling functioning via gravity-fed systems that needed only basic maintenance. Emergency lighting powered by kinetic generators that converted the storm's vibrations into usable energy. His primitive shelter was not just surviving the storm, but actually growing stronger as the planet's fury fed his backup power systems. Gorlak Prime, respond. Velter's panicked transmission cut through the static. Your structure's quantum matrix has gone completely dark. No response came from the massive Gorlak leader. His towering crystal fortress, designed to withstand the gravitational stresses of gas giant mining operations, had been the first to fail completely when the storm's electromagnetic interference overloaded its control systems. The technology that had seemed so impressive was helpless against phenomena it had never been programmed to recognize or counter. Marcus activated his emergency suit and approached the shelter's main airlock. Unlike the alien's automated systems, his airlock could function completely manually, using mechanical seals and pressure differentials that worked regardless of power or computer control. He had modified his environmental suit with additional filtering systems and basic navigation tools that would work even when all electronic systems failed. "This is Chen Human," he transmitted on the emergency frequency. "I'm going to attempt rescue operations. All remaining structures report your status and approximate position relative to my shelter." "Marcus, no." Velter's voice carried the liquid fear patterns unique to her species. "The storm will destroy you instantly. Your primitive equipment cannot possibly function in these conditions." "My equipment was designed specifically for these conditions," Marcus replied calmly. "Velter, where is your shelter relative to my position?" Through the massive interference, he could barely make out her response. "Approximately 200 meters bearing 095, but Marcus, our barrier system is failing completely. The structure itself is beginning to collapse." Marcus sealed his environmental suit and activated the mechanical systems that would open his airlock without requiring any electronic controls. The outer door opened to reveal a world transformed into a hellscape of flying sand and debris. Visibility was less than 5 meters. The air was filled with particles that would destroy any unprotected electronic equipment, and the electromagnetic interference was so intense that it created visible lightning patterns in the storm itself. But Marcus had prepared for exactly these conditions. His navigation system was entirely mechanical, using magnetic compasses and dead reckoning techniques that his ancestors had used to cross Earth's most hostile environments. His breathing apparatus filtered the air through multiple stages of mechanical filtration that worked better as the particles they encountered became smaller and more dangerous. Step by step, fighting against winds that would have knocked down anyone without his specific training and equipment, Marcus made his way toward Velter's failing structure. The storm was unlike anything in human or alien experience, a perfect fusion of atmospheric violence, electromagnetic chaos, and mechanical destruction that turned the simple act of walking into a life-threatening challenge. The Aquarian's crystalline shelter was already cracking when Marcus reached it. The energy barriers that had protected it from Zirian 7 environment had failed completely, and the structure itself was beginning to dissolve as the storm's chemical composition attacked the alien materials in ways their designers had never anticipated. Marcus activated the mechanical cutting tools he carried and began working to create an emergency exit through the shelter's wall. The Aquarian construction techniques, so advanced and elegant, had no provision for manual override or emergency access. Their technology simply assumed that their systems would never fail completely, leaving no backup plans when assumption proved wrong. "Velter," he shouted through his suit's communication system, "I'm cutting through your eastern wall. Get ready to move." The Aquarian's response was barely coherent, a mixture of her species' language and galactic standard that indicated she was in advanced stages of environmental distress. Her life support systems were failing, her shelter was dissolving around her, and her species' natural physiology was poorly adapted to the extreme conditions Zirian 7 was producing. Marcus broke through the wall and immediately assessed the situation inside. Velter was huddled near her shelter's center, her translucent blue skin now showing dark patterns that indicated severe stress and possible toxic exposure. The air inside her shelter was contaminated with particles and chemical compounds that her failing filtration systems could no longer remove. "Can you move?" Marcus asked, kneeling beside her. "The atmosphere," she gasped in response. "The chemical composition is wrong. My species cannot process these compounds. I am slowly being poisoned." Marcus had anticipated this possibility. He produced a secondary breathing apparatus designed specifically for non-human physiology, a simple but effective device that could provide clean air to almost any known species using mechanical filtration and basic chemical scrubbers. Unlike the alien's advanced life support technology, his equipment was designed to work in the most hostile possible conditions using principles that required no computer control or power systems. "Put this on," he instructed, helping her attach the breathing apparatus. We need to move now. My shelter can protect you, but we have to get there before your current structure collapses completely. Velter's species was not designed for rapid movement on land, but desperation gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. Marcus helped her through the hole he had cut in her wall and immediately began the dangerous journey back to his shelter, supporting her weight while fighting against winds that seemed determined to tear them both apart. The trip that had taken him 10 minutes alone stretched to nearly 30 minutes with Velter, but Marcus's navigation systems and emergency protocols proved their worth. Even when visibility dropped to zero, and the electromagnetic interference made all electronic communication impossible, his mechanical compass and dead reckoning techniques guided them steadily toward safety. They reached his shelter just as Zexhi's desperate transmission crackled through the chaos. Anyone? Emergency situation, life support complete failure, structure integrity at critical levels. Marcus sealed Velter into his shelter's emergency chamber, a space he had specifically designed to accommodate different alien physiologies, then immediately prepared for another rescue mission. His equipment had performed flawlessly during the first rescue, but each trip into the storm risked damage that might make subsequent operations impossible. "Zexhi, I'm coming for you," he transmitted. "Hold your position and conserve your emergency oxygen." "Impossible," came the Cathurian's reply. "No being could survive in these conditions. Our environmental suits are rated for extreme environments and they have already failed." "My suit was designed by someone who understood that all technology fails eventually," Marcus replied, sealing his airlock once again. "Sometimes the most primitive solution is the most reliable." As he stepped back into the howling chaos of Zirian 7 storm, Marcus reflected on the irony of the situation. The aliens' advanced technology, their quantum matrix generators and sophisticated environmental controls, had been defeated by a weather pattern they couldn't understand or predict. Their assumption that technological superiority meant automatic safety had left them helpless when their systems encountered phenomena outside their theoretical models. But Marcus's primitive human approach, built on redundancy, manual control, and the assumption that everything would eventually break, was not just surviving but providing the only hope of rescue for colonists whose advanced civilizations had never taught them how to function when their technology failed. The storm raged around him as he fought his way toward Zexhi's position, each step a testament to human adaptability and the strange truth that sometimes the most sophisticated solution was the simplest one that actually worked when everything else fell apart. Marcus reached Zexhi's crumbling tower as the Cathurian's final emergency power systems failed completely. The beautiful crystalline structure that had risen like a monument to alien technological superiority was now a death trap. Its energy barriers collapsed, and its environmental systems offline. Through the storm's chaos, Marcus could hear the distinctive clicking sounds that indicated extreme distress in Cathurian communication patterns. The entrance to Zexhi's shelter was sealed behind blast doors that required electronic access codes to open. Like all alien technology Marcus had encountered, the systems had no manual override, no mechanical backup, and no consideration for the possibility that their sophisticated controls might simply stop functioning. The designers had created perfect solutions for predictable problems while ignoring the possibility of complete system failure. Marcus examined the door structure and realized that brute force would be the only option. The alien materials were incredibly strong, but had been designed to resist specific types of damage. They had not been built to withstand the patient, methodical application of primitive human engineering principles applied with determination and basic tools. He set up his portable cutting torch, a simple device that used chemical reactions rather than sophisticated energy systems. Unlike the aliens' plasma cutters and quantum destabilization tools, his torch worked by combining basic elements in proportions that created intense heat through purely mechanical and chemical processes. It was slower, louder, and far less elegant than galactic standard equipment, but it functioned perfectly regardless of electromagnetic interference or power availability. "Zexhi," Marcus called through his communication system as he began cutting. "I'm coming through the door. Get as far from the entrance as possible." The response was barely coherent clicking sounds mixed with fragments of galactic standard language. The Cathurian was clearly in severe distress, possibly unconscious or suffering from atmospheric poisoning, as his life support systems failed to maintain the precise environmental conditions his species required for survival. It took Marcus nearly 20 minutes to cut through the blast door, precious time while Zexai's condition deteriorated inside the failing structure. But when he finally broke through, he found the Cathurian collapsed near the center of his shelter, his metallic exoskeleton showing stress fractures from the environmental pressure, and his breathing apparatus producing the irregular patterns that indicated imminent life support failure. Unlike Velter, who could be fitted with modified human breathing equipment, Zexai's physiology required more complex solutions. His species breathed through spiracles located along his thorax, and his internal chemistry required precise atmospheric mixtures that human equipment could not easily provide. Marcus would have to improvise using the resources available in the failing alien shelter. "Can you understand me?" Marcus asked, kneeling beside the distressed alien. Zexai's compound eyes focused on him with visible effort. "Human," he clicked weakly. "Impossible, you should not be alive in these conditions." "My equipment was designed for impossible conditions," Marcus replied, quickly assessing what remained functional in the alien shelter. "I need to modify your life support system to work without main power. Do you have emergency atmospheric canisters?" Zexai gestured weakly toward a storage compartment. Marcus found the emergency supplies, sophisticated containers filled with the precise atmospheric mixture the Cathurian required, but designed to interface only with the shelter's main computer systems. The connectors were incompatible with human equipment, and the activation sequences required electronic controls that were now completely inoperative. Marcus studied the problem with the methodical patience that had served him well throughout his career. The aliens had created perfect solutions that worked flawlessly under ideal conditions, but became useless when those conditions changed. He needed to create an imperfect solution that would work under any conditions, using whatever materials were available. Using his basic tools, Marcus began modifying the atmospheric canisters, creating manual valves and bypass systems that would allow him to control the flow of life-supporting gases without requiring computer interface. It was crude, potentially dangerous work that no properly trained alien technician would ever attempt. But it was exactly the kind of improvised engineering that humans had used to survive in hostile environments throughout their species' history. "This will not work," Zexai clicked weakly as Marcus jury-rigged connections between incompatible systems. "The atmospheric mixture requires precise pressure regulation. Manual control cannot maintain the necessary tolerances." "Manual control is all we have," Marcus replied, testing his improvised system. "And humans have survived in environments with imprecise atmospheric control for millions of years. You'll adapt or you'll die, but at least you'll have a chance." The makeshift life support system activated with a hiss of escaping gases. It was far from perfect, providing only approximately the atmospheric conditions Zexai needed rather than the precise measurements his species preferred. But it was functional and would continue working as long as the emergency canisters held out. Marcus helped Zexai attach the improvised breathing apparatus, then began preparing him for transport through the storm. The Cathurian's exoskeleton provided some protection against the harsh conditions outside, but his species had never evolved for the kind of extreme environmental stress that Zirian 7 was currently producing. "The others," Zexai managed to say as Marcus checked his equipment one final time. "Gorlak Prime, his structure failed first. He may still be alive." Marcus looked through the storm toward where the massive Gorlak shelter had stood. The crystal fortress that had towered over the colony was now invisible through the swirling sand and debris, but Marcus's instruments indicated that the structure had suffered complete structural failure rather than just system shutdown. Finding survivors in the wreckage would be nearly impossible, and attempting rescue would risk the lives of everyone he had already saved. But leaving someone to die without making the attempt went against every principle Marcus had learned during his survival training on Earth. Humans had colonized hostile environments throughout their species' history, not because their technology was superior, but because they refused to abandon each other when conditions became impossible. "We'll get him," Marcus decided, "but first I need to get you to safety." The journey back to Marcus's shelter with Zexai took even longer than the rescue of Velter had required. The Cathurian's exoskeleton was heavy and poorly designed for rapid movement, while his improvised life support system required constant monitoring to prevent atmospheric imbalances that could prove fatal. But Marcus's navigation equipment continued to function perfectly, guiding them through the storm using principles that required no electronic systems and no external references beyond basic magnetic fields. They reached his shelter as the storm's intensity began to increase beyond even Marcus's most pessimistic projections. His instruments registered wind speeds approaching 300 kilometers per hour, with pressure fluctuations that suggested the weather system was still growing in power rather than beginning to dissipate, as computer models had predicted. Marcus sealed Zexhai into his shelter's secondary emergency chamber, a space he had designed specifically to accommodate alien physiology requirements, then checked on Velter before beginning preparations for what would certainly be the most dangerous rescue attempt yet. Gorlak Prime's collapsed shelter was the furthest from his position. The route would take him through the most exposed areas of the colony, and the Gorlak's massive physiology would make transport extremely difficult even under ideal conditions. But as Marcus prepared his equipment for one more trip into Zirian 7 Fury, he reflected on the strange irony that his primitive human methods were proving more effective than the combined technological achievements of multiple advanced alien civilizations. The storm that was supposed to be impossible according to their scientific understanding was being survived using techniques that his ancestors had developed before they even discovered electricity. Outside, the wind howled with increasing violence, but inside his manually controlled shelter, three beings from different worlds were alive because sometimes the oldest solutions were still the best ones when everything else failed, and the only thing that mattered was refusing to give up when conditions became impossible. The search for Gorlak Prime through the wreckage of his crystal fortress took Marcus 3 hours of the most dangerous work he had ever attempted. The massive Gorlak leader's shelter had not simply lost power like the others, but had suffered complete structural collapse when the storm's electromagnetic interference caused cascading failures in the quantum matrix systems that held the crystalline structure together. Marcus found him buried under tons of crystal debris, his stone-like body cracked and damaged but still functioning. The Gorlak's natural physiology was incredibly durable, designed for survival in high-gravity mining environments, but even their legendary toughness had limits. Gorlak Prime was unconscious, his internal systems struggling to maintain basic life functions after hours of exposure to Zirian 7 hostile atmosphere. Moving a being who weighed nearly half a ton through hurricane-force winds using only primitive mechanical equipment was a challenge that would have been impossible for anyone relying on powered assistance. But Marcus had prepared for this possibility too, bringing modular transport equipment that used leverage, pulleys, and basic physics principles to multiply human strength far beyond its natural limits. The journey back to his shelter with Gorlak Prime was a nightmare of engineering and endurance that pushed both Marcus and his equipment to their absolute limits. But his manual navigation systems never failed. His mechanical tools continued to function despite the electromagnetic chaos around them, and his shelter's life support systems successfully adapted to accommodate a third refugee whose physiology was completely different from anything they had been originally designed to handle. By the time Marcus sealed his airlock for the final time, the storm had been raging for 18 hours and showed no signs of diminishing. His instruments registered conditions that exceeded anything in the galactic databases, with atmospheric pressures, wind speeds, and electromagnetic interference levels that made Zirian 7 temporarily uninhabitable by any known standard. But inside his primitive shelter, 4 beings from 4 different worlds were alive, breathing, and safe, because one human had refused to trust completely in advanced technology, and had instead prepared for the possibility that everything sophisticated would eventually fail when conditions became extreme enough. "The storm analysis," Velter said weakly as she recovered from her ordeal, her translucent skin showing the healthy blue patterns that indicated her species was no longer in immediate danger. "Our predictive models showed nothing like this. How did your equipment detect what ours missed?" Marcus checked his instruments again. The storm was finally beginning to weaken after nearly 24 hours of unprecedented violence, but the atmospheric conditions would remain dangerous for several more hours before returning to levels that might allow safe movement outside his shelter. "My equipment didn't detect it either," Marcus admitted. But my equipment was designed to work when the unexpected happened, not to prevent the unexpected from happening. There's a difference between predicting problems and surviving them. Zexai's mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was thoughtful consideration rather than mockery. Your shelter systems, they are not connected to any central control network. Each component functions independently. That's right, Marcus confirmed. If one system fails, the others keep working. If the power fails, everything can be operated manually. If the computers break, mechanical backups take over automatically. It's slower, less efficient, and definitely less elegant than your technology, but it works when nothing else does. Gorlak Prime stirred to consciousness, his massive voice now carrying undertones of confusion and what might have been embarrassment. The humans' primitive methods proved superior to quantum matrix technology. This outcome was not predicted by any analysis. Maybe that's the problem, Marcus suggested gently. Your technology is so advanced that it's only designed to handle situations that can be predicted and analyzed. But sometimes the universe produces situations that exist outside any model or database. Through his shelter's viewing port, Marcus could see the first signs that the storm was finally weakening. The visibility was improving gradually, and the electromagnetic interference was diminishing enough that his basic communication equipment might soon be able to establish contact with the outside galaxy. But the colony itself would need to be completely rebuilt, and the colonists' assumptions about technological superiority would need to be fundamentally reconsidered. When this storm ends, Velter said quietly, and rescue ships arrive from our respective governments, what will we tell them about what happened here? Marcus considered the question carefully. The aliens had come to Zirian 7 with absolute confidence in their technological superiority and their ability to impose galactic civilization on any environment they encountered. They had dismissed his primitive methods as backward, inefficient, and unnecessary given the sophistication of their own systems. But when those systems had failed completely, the primitive methods had not only survived, but had saved all their lives. Tell them the truth, Marcus replied finally. That advanced technology is incredible when it works, but it's only as good as its designer's ability to predict every possible situation. And sometimes the universe produces situations that no one can predict. Zexai's compound eyes focused on Marcus with what seemed like new understanding. Your species' survival methods, they assume that unpredictable failures will occur. They assume that everything will fail eventually, Marcus corrected. The question is not whether your technology will break down, but what you do when it happens. Do you have backup plans? Can you fix things with basic tools? Can you survive using methods that don't require power or computer control? Can you adapt when conditions become different from anything in your experience? Gorlak Prime's massive form shifted as he considered this perspective. Our civilizations have achieved technological advancement by eliminating such primitive concerns. We create systems that do not fail. But they did fail, Velter pointed out quietly. All of them completely. The communication channels crackled to life as the electromagnetic interference finally diminished enough to allow contact with orbital monitoring stations. The voices that came through carried shock and disbelief as observers who had watched the storm from space tried to understand how such a massive weather system could have formed without any advance warning from the most sophisticated prediction systems in galactic use. Colony Alpha 7, respond immediately, came the urgent transmission from what sounded like a rescue coordinator. Orbital monitoring shows complete loss of all shelter signatures. Are there any survivors? Marcus activated his transmitter, knowing that his response would surprise everyone listening. This is Chen Human, Colony Alpha 7, all colonists alive and safe, requesting delayed evacuation to allow time for structural assessment and equipment recovery. The silence that followed his transmission lasted nearly a full minute before the rescue coordinator responded. Chen Human, please confirm. Orbital analysis shows total destruction of all colony structures. How are you maintaining life support? Manual systems, Marcus replied simply. Requesting engineering assessment teams and reconstruction equipment suitable for extreme weather environments. As rescue ships began organizing their response to a situation no one had planned for, Marcus looked around his shelter at the 3 alien beings whose lives had been saved by methods their civilizations considered obsolete. They had learned something on Zirian 7 that no amount of technological advancement could teach. that the most sophisticated solution was not always the most reliable one, and that sometimes survival depended not on having the best technology, but on understanding what to do when the best technology wasn't enough. The storm had ended, but its lessons would reshape how the galaxy approached the colonization of unpredictable worlds. And at the center of those lessons was a simple truth that humans had always known, that the most important tool for survival in hostile environments was not superior technology, but the knowledge that all technology would eventually fail and the wisdom to prepare for that inevitability. Outside, Zirian 7 began to return to normal atmospheric conditions, but the planet had proven that it contained forces beyond the prediction of even the most advanced galactic science. The colonists who had mocked the humans' primitive shelter were now alive because those primitive methods had succeeded where sophistication had failed, and that success would change how the galaxy thought about survival, preparedness, and the strange human tendency to plan for disasters that more advanced civilizations assumed could never happen.